Hi, our guest today is the Town of Milford's Finance Director, Zach Taylor. And Zach is here to talk about the finances behind the proposed purchase of the Milford Water Company. Thanks for coming back, Zach.
Welcome
Thank you,
back.
Kevin. Thank you, Al. Appreciate the invite. Big project here in front of us, done a lot of work, and I think it's time to start talking in detail about it.
Good.
Right, so my understanding is, at your request, the town brought in the Lincoln Group, based in West Ennis, Mass, to really scrutinize the finances of the Milford Water Company itself and whether the town could purchase it. And at the recent public forum, it seemed everybody advocated for the purchase. But there are some surprises in there that the town needs a rate hike, which it initially didn't think. But as finance director of the town, the guy who oversees the borrowing, the guy who has to make sure this thing works, what's your feeling on the pros and cons of buying it? Can the town afford it?
So early on, getting brought into this, obviously that's the question of the day. That's the big question. Excuse me. Getting brought into this project, it was pretty overwhelming. It's a huge number. It's kind of funny. It's very similar to the project we just did with the high school. However, we were getting
Woodland School.
I'm sorry. We were getting significant reimbursement for that.
Yeah, I was going to
so-
say, the state's not paying back half of
Yeah,
it.
it's a little
yeah,
different.
A little bit different. So no state payback, and also nothing to do with the general fund. So it was a big project to undertake and really get to understand it, and want to make sure that we really knew what we were getting into. So what a lot of people probably don't realize is that this has been happening behind the scenes for a long time now. We've had money appropriated for over 4 years, and we had a consultant that was kind of doing a lot of behind the scenes work and bringing it together, and all that work was helped us get into negotiations and back in December. And
But in fact, one of that consultant's assumptions these guys found just wouldn't cut it.
yeah, and
It was a good assumption, but in reality,
to go deeper into that, so you mentioned that I had insisted that we have some deeper financial due diligence. And one of the main reasons was I was very uncomfortable with that assumption of additional borrowing myself.
14 million on top of 63
14 million on top of 63. It's just logically looking at it, it didn't make a lot of sense. It was a scary number.
I looked at it as, you know, I have a limit on my credit card, and I spend up to the limit, and when I get it about a third paid off, I'll borrow up to the limit again.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. So when you look at it in the long run, you're going in the opposite direction. So it was something that I challenged from the get-go. From when it first came out, I was very skeptical on not only if it was possible, but which it still could be. It could be possible. Right. I mean, they issue money and probably have a strong enough case to get it, but really wasn't prudent financial management to do so.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
Going back to the June hearing, when you guys had a public hearing, you said you had financial goals for the purchase. Can you repeat what those were?
I will. So one of which was to achieve rate stability, one of which, the most important in my opinion, was to make sure that everything as far as bonding and operations, salaries would be to keep it within said enterprise fund that we would be creating.
Right, just like
the
the state
third
department
was
has
to
one.
make sure we understand the capital and have means to pay for the capital, because if anything out of this entire exercise, we come to realize that this is a very capital intense industry and it cannot be sacrificed. Hence the conundrum that we entered once we figured out that, although again, maybe possible to borrow, it's just not a good idea. So we took that.
I was going to say, it wasn't one of your other points that the rest of the town's financing not be affected.
Correct, sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
So the question is, does the way the town wants to do it now satisfy those 4 objectives you laid out?
Except for the first one of rate stability. However.
But after
and-
the initial increase,
Yes.
there will be.
Yes, there you go. So no, it sounds a little funky, but there's this catch up, there's this rebalancing that we're calling it, that we need to get to the proper level of where we need to be to achieve rate stability. So, that sounds a little sneaky,
So,
if
well,
you
the
will,
goal
but-
is the goal is to reach that rate stability.
Correct.
So-
After that initial
so-
rate hike, then you're still predicting the 2 to 5% a year increase.
I am.
Okay.
Yep.
Now,
I
the other
do
thing you
believe we
found
can,
out
yeah.
through these guys' due diligence was that at the end of the consent order the Milford Water Company signed in around 2010 with the Department of Environmental Protection, they promised to do $24 million worth of capital improvements over 10 years. We're 7 years later, and they did just about 2.
That's correct.
So that's-
However, Tatter and Howard was recommended, and it wasn't anything that really made it mandatory for them to do so. However, these were recommendations that clearly would have improved quality and would have ensured quantity. So we kind of, through this process, asked ourselves the question, why? Especially when we come to find out that a lot of these quality issues seemingly were short-change issues. So there's a lot of them, but some of them that
Putting a chemical in the water means when you
yeah,
flush it
I'm
instead of bare water.
I'm going to give you a real big example of what really stuck out to me. So part of this distribution system, excuse me, has, rather than having it looped around, there's a lot of end caps where
Right.
it would just end, and there's no hydrant locations on there. I think the number was upward of 67. So when they're actually doing,
They just end?
they just end. So without a hydrant. So if you just think logically about it. So I don't have to be an engineer, nothing like that. To
You can't
understand
flush those.
If you're going to flush it, what's going to happen? It's going to go all the way to the end, and stop, and then trickle back. So where, if you actually had the hydrant, short change hydrants, not tremendously expensive, that your actual exercise
They
of
had
flushing
67 hydrants.
would work, And at the same time, it's only till recently this dawned on me. I'm like, wait a minute. So the town actually pays hydrant services, and it's paid based on the number of hydrants that are in the town.
Why didn't
So
they
it's-
put them in?
and they would have recouped the money. So this was the big question of like, we don't understand what happened. And then it took deeper thought process to really come up with a theory. At this point, it's really a theory.
They
that
don't have the money.
They don't have the money. And a big factor really is that they had to, and this is one of the consent orders they had to do, that was not part of the $22 million
What was the
capital
plan?
plan, was the plant.
And they borrowed
So-
to build that.
They
And
borrowed to build it. It was over
and-
20 million. So if you think about it, the debt service numbers being carried annually, that's a chunk of change that is now not available. for
Which, by the way, the
for,
town does
capital.
not pick up.
That's correct.
So if the town buys the water company,
We
all
don't
the
buy
debt,
the debt.
all the debt it owns, they have to pay off with what the town pays them.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, that does not enter our
Okay.
books. All those that our due diligence on the legal side is working very hard right now to make sure that there's no sneaky liabilities hanging out there that are going to come back and bite us in the butt years down the road.
Well, the liability that you do pick up, which is the improvement of the water system.
Correct.
That's really the goal.
Yes.
Is to
Okay.
pick up the responsibility and improve the quality of the water. which
Correct.
is-
No.
So before you continue, so what you just said is really smart, and I wanted to follow up on that. So I had these 4 more or less like self-imposed goals, financial goals,
Yes.
and then I fed them to the selectmen. Selectmen agreed that's what we're trying to do. That was the big hurdle to overcome. But when you actually looked at like, all right, let's take a look at the overall goal, whether you want to call that financial or whatever, that was our overall goal.
better quality.
And it was almost that the former assumptions was forcing our other financial goals to work at the sacrifice of the main objective.
Right.
So something needed to give.
Right.
And something that needed to give was that we were not going to walk right into this without a necessary rate increase
the
to
fact
avoid
that-
additional
You
borrowing.
have to do that.
But the fact of the matter is, your consultants said somewhere between 15 and 30%.
Correct.
And the water company has asked for 29.6
Correct.
and would probably get somewhere around 20 from the Department of Public Utilities. So the rate hikes are roughly in line with what they would have done if the town doesn't buy it.
That's
And the
correct.
significant issue difference here that should be noted is with no plan or guarantee that they're going to make the water system better.
Correct.
And-
Exactly.
Which
And
is the,
you now have an elected water board,
who is run by the-
elected by the people, at least in next April's election,
Yeah.
So it's,
in charge of so that when you have a water problem, you can go to somebody's house with your glass of what looks
Check.
like it came in from a
Check.
sewer pipe
And
and say,
check.
fix this.
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's interesting because what's really happening here is that the town is going to pick up the thing that everybody has known needed to be done to the water system. Finally, the town, if this happens, the town will pick it up and will be able to set a course to repair and make the quality of the water what the town expects.
That's the intent.
That's the intent.
Yep.
Given the facts of what you now know, and I posed this question to Al before we started taping, and everybody doesn't like the water company and the way they treat people and the quality of the water, and we now know we can afford it. It almost begs the question: why are we even debating this?
Seriously,
which
I
is
know.
the
Yeah.
good point.
However, it is a democracy. The other part of
Yeah.
that, though, is it is a democracy, and the law requires a vote, and you just don't want to spend $63 million without a vote. But in reality, since I don't vote in Milford, it begs the question, like,
Why?
Why would a
Why?
town meeting member oppose this?
Well, I to some extent, I can appreciate to some extent why there's a question, and the reason why is because Milford has a reputation and is viewed by the state, generally people in the state of Massachusetts, as being one of the best, well-run financial towns in the state. So as a result, how do you come to that? Is the people ask the questions? Now, some of them may be. So you may look at the question and go, "Ooh, why'd you ask that question?" But it's as a result of people asking that question, it forces the people that govern the town, to find the response to those questions. And as a result, it forces a much deeper due diligence
Correct.
than other places have.
And Al, it's smart you say it that way, because we are a very well-run financial town. And I think $63 million is nothing to sneeze at. It's a big number. I think I think there was a lot of misconception early on that this was going to be like general fund borrowing, and that it was not going to be this enterprise fund for one, and two, that maybe certain things would have trickled through this and actually affected our ability to bond down the line. Now, the intent there is that it will not, and the logic and the theory there is it will not. So we're also not only acquiring and taking on this additional debt, we're now bringing in a new revenue stream as well.
But the interesting part about it is going to be an enterprise system, just like your wastewater facility is an enterprise system. So the users are going to pay for the improvements over the long haul, which is so essentially
Not somebody who has a well in town.
right. Somebody has a well.
Correct.
Now, interestingly enough, I had the fortune or misfortune to be a selectman in Upton, and we had our own water system. And I went and talked to the selectman on the occasion. I said, "Gee, having come from a town and had been a selectman in a town that had its own water system, there were a myriad of issues that went with that burden, so to speak. But it always had very good quality water. It's some of the best water in the state. And we at one time wanted to sell the system, and that didn't happen, and we didn't do it, which, as I look back on it, is probably a good thing.
Probably.
Based on the experience that Milford has had with that same buyer.
Yeah.
So I told the selectman, I don't know, why would you want to pick up that burden? But as I look at the issues that are on the table, it makes sense for Milford, knowing historically what has happened to the quality of the water and what's happened. It makes sense that the only way Milford can improve that quality is to pick up ownership at a reasonable cost. Because as you said, if somebody else buys it, you know darn good and well they're going to raise the water rates too.
Well, I think people need to understand that. Let's just keep the price at the same $63 million, even though the assets you guys know are actually worth more than that, because you got a high-end figure of close to $90 million.
Correct.
And your mediator, Jordan Levy, not Jordan Levy, Paul Levy, got it to 63, which both sides agreed on.
That's a good buy.
If another private entity, and the only one in the area, I mean, let's face it, is Aquarian, which is now a division of Eversource, which has paid almost $2 billion for it. If Aquarian came in and spent the same $63 million, and they'd have to do the same $12 billion of capital, they have the right to go to the State Department of Public Utilities and say, we just invested $75 million. We need to be able to charge people to make money off that. And the rate increase could be 8-fold, 9-fold, 10-fold, legitimately.
Totally.
Right.
The other factor, big company like that, maybe they have the cash to put up, although we know they just did that very large purchase.
Yeah.
Chances are pretty good they're going to do some borrowing.
Yes.
And they're not a municipality, so they're not going to reap the benefits of muni bonds. So
Right.
their interest rate's going to be significantly higher.
Right,
That's
but I think-
directly passed on to the
Yeah,
rate
To the
but
user.
I think
Yeah.
people need to know. So plan A is, you know, leave it as is. Or plan A is buy it. Plan A is the same folks run it. Plan C is somebody else buys it, and your rates go up to infinity.
It
to
costs
finance
more.
that
with no
purchase.
guarantee whatsoever.
Right,
that
on the
we
quality.
Can,
That the
we
service
can
would be
actually
better.
affect the quality or have
Absolutely.
any
Right.
say on it. you know.
Whereas the chairman of the finance committee, Chris Bourne, pointed out at the recent public hearing, after 30 years, the town owns it outright.
That's what I think really needs to be beefed up more. People need to understand that, and this isn't trying to be like a sales tactic. It's true. It's like, look at your mortgage, you know, and a lot of, you've heard the questions at the forum. How much is this really going to cost with interest? It's probably more like $100 million, but so
Right.
isn't your house. You paid $300,000 for your house. At the end,
But-
well, like you're paying significantly higher when
Right.
you bring interest in it. But at the same time, once you're into your mortgage halfway through, you could break into your line of credit, you know. So this plan is just saying
Well,
no
it-
additional borrowing the first 10 years. I got an email today from a concerned citizen asking, oh, we can't borrow at all for the next 30. I'm like, we're not saying that. Just at 10 years in, your balance is now reduced significantly, and now you may have the ability to
Within
now-
that enterprise.
within the enterprise
Fund, right.
Within
And
the enterprise
and
fund.
people
No.
don't really understand the difference, what an enterprise fund
Well,
is.
One of the interesting things is the public forums, the two of them, the one in June and the one in September, were mostly attended not by people who understand day-to-day government, but by ordinary people. So I think personally, town officials did a good job of answering the questions, and the people who disagreed were people who don't understand government is different than business, and there's all these laws involved. And my great example is it takes a town-wide vote to decide whether or not you have retail marijuana sales, but only a 2/3 of 240 people vote to decide to borrow $63 million to buy the water company.
Right.
Exactly. It
Because
seems
the laws are
backward.
different.
Seems backward.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't think so, because what better place to have the people because what really governs how much money you're spending in the year to year, it's the governing body, which is representative town meeting.
Yep,
So it makes sense,
legislative body, yeah.
right? So
Yep.
it makes sense that if you're going to spend money, those people who have been elected in the Milford to identify those expenditures be the ones that vote on the expenditures. Now it makes sense to have 2/3 majority because it's a
It's
borrowing.
borrowing.
So
Borrowing's
now if
Yep.
you're moving free cash, if you're moving out of stabilization, it's a there's so the interesting part about it is that it really does go to the core issue. It does go to the core issue. Now the ballot question, I think that's the right place for it too.
Yeah, I would have thought that the ballot question would have approved the purchase, but not the price, and then town meeting would have approved the
Well,
price.
interestingly enough, if you didn't have the ability to borrow, then the rules might be a different story. So it's an
Yeah.
interesting dilemma depending upon where you're
It
at.
is. Nonetheless, here we are. I mean,
And I think
it
it's
is.
I think
Okay.
it's absolutely as I look and I've changed my position on this. My opinion is that I think the right thing for the town to do. It makes sense because after how many years when the water problem was?
2009.
2009. After 9 years, there are still people in this town that get brown water.
Town hall does. I remember I started in 2010.
Selectman Mike Walsh is getting it
Yeah,
right
okay.
now.
I got a drink out of the bubbler in 2010. I haven't once
Well,
drank from it.
imagine that you get Mike Walsh elected selectman telling people last April, I'm a skeptic on this. Okay? He had to be convinced this made sense.
Yes, he did.
He's getting brown water out of his home faucet right now.
So,
Yeah.
generally speaking,
I think that convinced him.
Yeah, I think so.
So what's happened is that after a certain amount of time, you've given the current owners of the water system the time to improve it. And I think, we're talking 9 years. And after 9 years, they've invested $1.8 million into a $24 million package that they were supposed to do
Correct.
to make it better.
Correct.
I think that at that point in time, you say it didn't work.
It's not. It's
It didn't happen.
again,
this were-
fairness, they did purchase the $20 plus million
Right.
processing plant. They did, which clearly interfered. But as I responded to an email today saying, I think what happened here was just years and years of trying to put the kibosh on capital. It just created
Well,
a snowball effect.
Yeah, what's happening is, my mother used to say, the chickens have come home to roost,
Roost, right.
because it's decades of deferred maintenance
Yes. Yes.
are now catching up. It's sort of like the nation's highways. I was astonished to find out we build the interstate system to last 50 years.
Surprise, surprise.
And guess what?
Past 50.
The beginnings of it were in the late 1950s. We're past that 50.
By a fur
Yeah.
piece.
So when you hear that we need billions of national infrastructure improvement, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here. But some of the fixes are fairly easy, you said.
Well, Kevin,
67 hydrants.
here's the Tatter and Howard report. You have it all footnoted and whatnot. I read this cover to cover 3 different times. And I'm no engineer. I don't confess to whatsoever. I struggled with some of the terminology. I looked it up. I tried making sense of it. But this thing's point blank in here that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand.
Figure it out.
No,
It's simple and it's just
spelled out what street where
everywhere. So in great detail. So
with
it's
a 2010 cost attached to it.
correct.
And there-
so we
the-
just, again, we could not make sense of why they did not do this.
Money.
And I mentioned purposely, and it's written in the report too last night, on how we're realizing marginal profits here. I did that purposely because if you remember early on in this process, it was talked a real lot about how you strip away profits, right?
And use that to pay off the bond.
You strip away taxes, right?
Right.
So if you're marginally profitable, there's not much profit, you're not paying much tax there, right?
Right.
So there ended up not being a whole lot to remove.
Well,
They have debt, we have debt, they have operating expense, we have operating expense, they have salary, we have salary. It turned out that, like, hey, we kind of really challenged that concept. And further, I meant to talk last night, and I didn't, about how at the first forum I suggested that, and it was actually asked of us, that we were going to try to go and look for other contested takeovers
Right.
from public to private.
Right, were there
Vice
any?
versa. Yeah, we found, ironically enough, it was published in January of 2017. It was called the Analysis Group. They did a report on 4 different takeovers throughout the last decade.
Of municipal government?
Of municipal
And
government.
private water.
Very similar situation. It was pretty wild because a lot of the statements seemed like deja vu. of what was
Oh, really?
happening. Yeah, I swear it was really wild.
And how did the
these
4 work out?
particular situations differed in one major aspect. One, through these negotiations you alluded to with Paul Levy in Boston back in December, we did get to a mutual number. These other situations, they didn't, so they spent a lot of time, effort,
Fighting
and
the
money fighting it at the DPU. So much so that they went out and made a statement that in doing so, these towns, cities and towns, had underestimated the cost by upwards of 100%. So,
Well, I think you draw on a point that people don't remember.
Wow.
The Milford Water Company agreed to the mediation. Had the 2 sides not been able to agree, the DPU would have been decided, and Bob Russell may have been Dave Russell, sorry, may have been wrong on the secondary borrowing, but he nailed it when he said the assets are worth closer to $90 million.
Yeah.
The DPU could have very much come to the town and say the
Absolutely.
purchase price is $90 million.
Absolutely.
63, and I don't think people realize the $63 million is the value today of all the buildings and equipment. It doesn't necessarily affect the fact that they haven't maintained it, but there are buildings there.
Yeah.
Right.
There are people there. You're buying land. You're buying Echo Lake.
Yeah.
There is an intrinsic value to that.
Exactly. I'm glad you say that because it took me a very long time to digest that the assets on the books were really like 40 million change, roughly, right? So like, why are we paying 63?
Because there's other things to go with it.
Yes.
Now,
Well, you have a
The
building
right
on Dilla
to sell
Street.
water. There's
Right.
the mineral rights. There's,
Right,
there's
but you
all
ha-
that other stuff that
Right,
comes
but
with
you
it.
have a building on Dilla Street that half of it's being rented out to a hair salon right now. That rent will come to the town.
Yep.
You have property in Hopkinton that you're paying Hopkinton property taxes on. I assume it's still going to pay
There is one residential property that they asked to be
the
excluded.
director's house
Yeah.
on West Walnut.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
Right.
Yep, exactly. So,
Now, well, the other issue that comes to mind, and I can say this with some limited knowledge, that there are some employees, some people that are currently working for the water system that will not continue to work for the water system.
Only one has indicated that so far.
that's our belief, and strong belief that there's one, but there's probably others.
Yeah.
However, Al, to that point, it's written into the warrant article to buy it that all will be offered jobs.
Right. No, I understand that. It's
And-
not an issue
and
of,
their pension from the water company will be resolved at the sale, so the town picks up no pension
no
liabilities.
pension liability, which is a good thing.
They start new with town benefits and town pension as
So they'll have
a
zero,
brand new employee on day one.
so they'll have there will be no grandfathering of time and grade and for pension purposes.
Unless people want to sign employment contracts, but that hasn't said
Okay.
anything
But-
yet.
Well, their pension will not be
Our responsibility.
will not be
The
our
town's-
responsibility.
okay.
But
But-
I'm
and-
working
and-
with PERAC right now.
Okay,
on, like,
because
the-
I do know that there are
Right.
some,
No, you and I discussed that offline, and my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, was that everybody will be made whole when the company is dissolved and it becomes, or if
That's
the
the
company
intent.
is dissolved, it becomes part of the town, and then when they come to town employee, they
They'll
start
have-
then at year one, or
and they will
day
have,
zero to year one into the
they will have an
municipal
opportunity to
pension
go to
system.
work for the town if they desire.
They will have the opportunity
Okay.
to work for the town.
They're all going to
They
be
will.
offered jobs, and
They'll
again,
all- Yep.
and
they're-
I know for a fact, because the one we're talking about basically told me, I'm not working for the town,
Yeah.
and that's the manager.
Yeah, yep. So it is what it is. So I think.
And quite honestly, the selectmen wanted to replace him anyway.
Yeah. So what I think is really tremendously important that we're going to get to that point
Yes.
is through the Lincoln Group, who I don't know how much detail we've gone into, but this was a group of 4 people that was specifically put together based on experience. In
One
the
of them ran a water
industry.
company.
One of them ran a water company. One of them's currently running a water company. One of them has gone through acquisitions his entire life. Very impressive people. One of them's an engineer for water systems, so he got brought in later on when we started diving deep into capital. But it was a dynamic team that was really put together there, and they've really done a great job.
Okay.
And-
We've got about a minute left, so basically, assuming you could talk right now to the town meeting members, because you're probably going to have to repeat this on the 26th, what would you tell them from the finance end? They look to you for the financial recommendation. The the finance committee is going to make its recommendation separately.
Yeah.
You'll probably get up. What would you tell them in a minute or less?
In a minute or less, I'd tell them we've done a lot of homework on this. It's a scary number. It still makes me nervous moving forward. However, we do feel that this can very much be done. It will take a rate increase, but a necessary rate increase in order to have the appropriate amount of revenue to complete the necessary capital to actually demonstrate proper quality improvements and to ensure quality for the
Okay.
future. And in the long run, you will see economic advantages as this debt is paid off.
Right. It may take a
It's going to take
generation.
time, but it will. It will. As it gets paid off, we'll be in a much better situation, and a lot of what,
And you're young enough, so you'll still be the finance director then.
hopefully, we'll see. You
Well,
know?
the good news is, quite
Yeah.
honestly, that one of the big benefits that comes out of it is the quality of the product. The
Absolutely.
that's the
It
that's the
is.
thing
And
that
I would
people-
say accountability to
And
somebody elected.
accountability.
Well,
Yep.
well, that makes the quality guaranteed.
Yeah.
If I can come to you and complain about it and know that you're responsible for it, that makes a significant
Yep.
difference.
Exactly.
Hey, Zach, we're out of time. We thank you for
Thank you.
this.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll be listening to you on the 26th when the vote is taken,
Sure you will.
and we'll see what goes on.
We'll go get them. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.